All right, so I'm super happy to be here today, guys. Yeah, I just flew in about 7 hours ago, so if I'm incoherent, please forgive me. I'm going to start off with an introduction. I'm going to talk about the 3 things I love most in this world. This is the most terrific kid on the planet, but I might be biased. Another thing I love is making music, playing bass, totally love it. Another thing I love is working in UX. This is the most amazing industry. I can't believe how fascinating, how it's always changing, it's always new. I just love working in UX. So I'm going to talk about my background, but a bit about me. So growing up with the name Krispian wasn't always easy. I got teased a lot. But now, haha, I always get the username I want, whatever I register for. Okay, so I stand before you, a grizzled veteran. I started off in the 90s designing web pages. Does anyone here remember the single pixel GIF? When formatting and content were mixed together, you'd have to do your formatting with tables. Do you guys remember tables? Anyway, so I was making websites for advertising agencies, started specializing in the mid-2000s in usability, interaction design, information architecture, did some work for Samsung, even BlackBerry when they were cool. In 2009, got an amazing opportunity in Australia. I worked for Different. So that's when I started learning about user research, not just usability, designing multi-channel service design experiences and UX strategy. So I came home from Australia back to BC, started working as a contractor for various places like the BC Lotteries, Microsoft Big Park Game Studio, and right now I'm contracting at one of Canada's largest telcos, TELUS. So that's a bit about me, but enough about me. I want to know about you guys. All right, how many here are frustrated in your work sometimes? A little bit? Oh, good. Do you find it's hard to have influence, that your UX work sometimes doesn't always go the way you want it to? Do you find that product owners, product managers, or engineerings have more power than you? Does that resonate? Okay. Do any of you have to fight to do user research that we need to do? Oh, good. And how many of you just want to become more valuable? Yay. All right, so that's what I'm here to talk about. I've got 1 tenet and 3 tools to help you be more valuable. And then I'm going to cover a case study of my own work. So I'll show you how I put some of these principles into practice. Others I've learned recently. So before I start, let's all get on the same page, define value. What does that mean? What do we mean by user experience? Let's get a common definition here. Usually it's the experience with an interface, right? But we step back. You guys all know. You step back and you can design ecosystems and multi-touch points. But I'd like you to think about stepping back yet again. User experience, as we learned in our last talk, which was fabulous, it can really make people's lives easier. And I really think it can make the world a better place. Okay, so what do we mean by a good or bad experience? So I'm a fan of the work of Tim Liu. He says it's the interplay between what users expect and what happens. So that's a really nice, succinct way of phrasing it, I think. So if what actually happens is what people expect, it's a good experience. And if what happens isn't what they expect, like what you guys just talked about, it's a bad experience. But as you guys know, it's really easy to talk about what users expect, but it's really hard to figure that stuff out. And so what do we mean by being a valuable UX professional? So I've got 3 facets, 3 ways that I think about being valuable. First of all, you could be more versatile as a professional. Expand your tool set, broaden it. I mean, obviously, it's good to be a specialist, but as I tell my students, the more arrows in your quiver, the more you'll stand out among other candidates for jobs, and the more opportunities will open up for you. When you're valuable, you're a better influencer. That means you have more team influence within the teams and projects. Some of the frustrations we have is when you don't have that influence, when you don't have influence over decisions, scope, and strategy. And then finally, increasing the worth of this discipline. That's so awesome. So when you're valuable, we can hopefully together get the respect this profession deserves, because there's so much we can do to help people. It's a shame sometimes we have to fight to get it across. So the more value we have as professionals, the more it lifts us all up. So I've covered some definitions, and now I'll cover some tips on how you could be a bit more valuable. Shifting your thinking towards learning, towards contributing, towards improving. So let's talk about learning. So my daughter's in high school, and going to school is not her favorite thing. And I was saying to her how much I love working in UX and how I learn something new every day, and it's like going to school every day. And she thought that was the most horrible thing she'd ever heard. So let's talk about learning. This is obviously nothing new to you guys, but it's worth covering. So think about always learning. There's resources that are free or low cost. Online courses like Coursera or Pluralsight. I'm a Pluralsight author. Obviously books, blogs, and websites. Meetups and professional organizations. If you guys haven't joined a few of these and started networking, they're amazing. And of course, look at you guys here learning. So this is good. But also shift your thinking towards contributing. Now that you're learning a lot, now you can kind of give back and you can educate your colleagues. The best way to learn is to teach. So get your stakeholders involved, teach your colleagues. Think about facilitation. That is one of the most important soft skills that we have as a UX professional. And then finally, think to yourself, how can we improve the discipline overall? How can you give back? Well, mentoring, teaching, if you see any opportunities, and speaking at conferences. So even if you don't feel you have something to contribute, you do. There's always somebody more junior than you that you can mentor. And just try giving a conference speech a try. Even if you find it scary, you'll find it's kind of like going on the high diving board. It's really scary at first, and then you do it, and you're like, oh, that's not so bad. All right. And so finally, I invite you, shift your thinking towards thinking like an architect and not a decorator. Okay, so that's our first tenet. Think architect and not decorator. So, yeah. So when I'm talking about architect and not decorator, it's a call to action to go deeper. The IA Polar Bear book, it talks about information architecture and experience design as being invisible. You can't really, you know it's there, but you can't really label it. And it's kind of the same thing that makes chess, chess. The thing that makes chess, chess is invisible, right? So all of these are chess, right? We've got the cheap portable set you play with your brother in the back seat of the car. You've got the park game of chess, computer chess. This one at the top is correspondence chess of 100 years ago, and it's in German. But it's how people would mail chess across to each other. It would probably take weeks, 100 years ago, for each move to happen. You know, something made in Dad's wood shop, a beautiful chess set. Here's command line chess. And do you guys know what this is? I Googled world's most expensive chess set. It's made of pure gold and platinum and whatnot. So all of these things are chess, but it's not the design of the board, is it, that makes it chess? It's something deeper. So have a read of this, my favorite quote. Any of you guys seen this quote before? It might be old cliche, but I don't care because I love it. I love it because think about the longing of the endless immensity of the sea rather than just building a boat. I love that concept. And so if we think about UI and interaction design, that's kind of like thinking about the design of the chessboard. It's like collecting the wood and doing the tasks for boat building. And while they're important, I want you to think deeper. So just as the underlying rules and systems that make up chess, that make chess chess, they transcend the board, I want you guys to transcend the interface and think architect and not decorator. So I'll talk about what I mean, the difference between architect and not decorator. But just a caveat here, I practice this talk in front of my students, and for some reason you'd think my students all belong to the decorator union because they all rose up and said, hey, how dare you disparage decorators? And I'm like, no, I'm not trying to disparage decorators. I'm just trying to prove a point here. I'm being simplistic, so please bear with me. Again, it's thinking deeper. So an architect will be in charge of the strategy. The architect gathers the requirements, gets to the core of the problem. The architect has control over the influence, the vision, the scope of the solution. The shape will follow the function. And the architect is the bridge between the solution and how it fits into a larger context. I'm being simplistic here, but bear with me. So this is an architect. They have control over the shape. Decorator, simplistically speaking, is concerned with aesthetics, materials, furnishings, carpet, drapes. They can adorn a space, but they don't really affect the shape of the space, right? They couldn't really change this into a 6 times the size auditorium. They could decorate the inside of this auditorium. And they have little influence, little contribution to the overall vision and scope of the solution. So think about, an architect. He's gathering, or she's gathering the client requirements, and she says, "You're telling me you need a cathedral, but you really need a shopping mall." So the architect could influence the shape. Now the decorator would be brought in after the cathedral's built, and all they could do is plaster sale signs inside of there. Okay. So this wonderful model, I learned this in Australia working with Anthony Kohlfeldt, and I learned it almost 10 years ago, and I use it at every talk and every class I teach because I love it. It explains why we're often cast into the role of decorator, even if we don't want to be. And that's because the business requirements, technological solution, they get together in a room and they plan everything out, all the strategy, the scope, the vision, usually. And everything's worked out, and then UX is kind of tacked on at the end. Okay? And so there's this expectation that UX is like this magical thing that will turn a bad idea into something that's useful, intuitive, useful. You guys know. And I think the reason for that is because if stakeholders are focusing on the activities on the tip of the iceberg, I mean, granted, they are the most visible, tangible aspect of our work, but if they focus only on that, then they think that's what we do. So you guys know, beneath the surface, we've got activities, such as these. And the way I think of them is at the top you've got decorator activities, and at the bottom you've got architect activities. And stakeholders may not know about these architect activities. Okay? So only architect activities help us design the right thing in the first place. Otherwise, we're just designing the thing right? We're sprinkling that UX fairy dust and magically transforming it into the right thing, but who knows if it's the right thing. So it's up to us to educate our colleagues and stakeholders. I personally had an epiphany. I used to be so frustrated in my work. I used to be going, don't they know we need to do user research? And now these days, I'm like, they don't know we need user research. It's up to me. So maybe the tenet should be phrased like this. All right, so that's tenet. And now let's talk about 3 tools to help you be more valuable as a UX pro. So almost exactly a month ago, I was in Boulder. Beautiful Boulder, not as beautiful as New Zealand, by the way, but pretty nice place. UX Strategy Conference, one of my favorite conferences. I love it because it's senior professionals. Everybody's old like me. I love it. So I went to a workshop with the fabulous Tim Liu, who I quoted earlier. And here's what I learned from him. And I stole this directly from his workshop slides. So as you become more senior as a UX professional, you start working in the more strategic realm. And he came up with what he calls a strategist continuum, where you start off being clever, and then you can actually make stuff happen. So I'm not sure if you guys can see this okay, but here's what we're doing here. We're learning our design skills, we're learning methodologies and toolkits, and some of the stuff I was trying to teach you earlier, it has to do with strategy framework. But how do we actually make stuff happen? Being clever activities, that's usually what we're concerned with as UX professionals. But I think a lot of the frustrations, those of you raising your hand, they occur because we're unable to make that stuff happen. And as you can see, none of that stuff is UX. Do you see any traditional UX activities there, really? So guess what? You guys need to learn, do a lot more learning. As my daughter would say, oh no, more learning. Yeah, here's a whole new tool set that we need to learn as professionals to become more valuable. But here's some tools that I've kind of boiled down simplistically to help you get to that. So tool number 1, question everything. Number 2, know your audience. 3, speak the language. What does that mean? Question everything. So the technique, the stakeholder interview is a technique that you guys probably all know, but it's the one that I learned to turn from the status quo, where I don't really have a say in the vision or scope or strategy of the solution, to something more like this, again from Anthony Kohlfeldt, where you start with the user experience at the beginning. So stakeholder interview, even if you do it already, try to build it formally into your work. Request a formal conversation, because you can uncover a lot of assumptions. So if you guys haven't done a stakeholder interview, here's some handy questions that I use at the beginning of every project, and it really helps. What is the purpose? What is the goal? How do we know we're successful? And this is an opportunity for you to really dive into what does success look like for the business? What does success look like for the users? This one here. What success metrics can we use? This is when you start really working strategically. Who are the users? You'd be surprised when I ask that question. A lot of people can't answer that. You know it. What problems are we solving for our users? What tasks are critical? So this is a really good starting point. So Andrew Hinton is a really great author and a really great thinker. And he's always throwing out golden nuggets like this that I steal from my talks. And it's true. The goal with this question everything tool is try to always have that strategy well articulated. Get it out, get talking about it. And not just well articulated verbally, but you capture it, get it down in writing. This is something I learned over the years. Oh, he told me that it would be like this months ago, and then in the craziness of the project, it all goes to heck. And I didn't get it in writing. And so not only get it in writing, but get it signed off, because that's some accountability, and you can lock things down when they articulate the strategy. And another thing you can do is you can use this as an opportunity to educate the stakeholders, right? So you're sitting down across from them. Hey, did you know about this fabulous thing called upfront user research, where you don't have to spend all this time and money building something and then do usability testing to see it's totally crap? And show them some case studies, show them, as I'll show you, some numbers that will resonate with them. So spend time with them, teach them. What that leads to is know your audience. So this tool, usually when I teach it, is know your users and your stakeholders, but you guys have lots of great techniques on learning the users already. So I'm gonna focus on knowing your stakeholder. How do we get to know our stakeholders? Like I said, spend time with them. Do things like read the annual report if you haven't done that already. Don't be afraid to conduct ethnographic research on your stakeholders and even distill into some models that we all know. When I was working at Different, they actually did create stakeholder personas, and they worked well. And here's another tool. You know, I have to give Tim Liu maybe some royalties or something, but last month at his workshop, he showed me this tool that they use at their consulting practice in London, England. And what they do is they map out the stakeholders according to criticality of success, and then whether they're resistant to the UX activities that you're trying to get across, or whether they're supportive. And what he said is there's always going to be detractors, people you can't win over. Don't waste your energy. And Yahoo, if you've got some advocates, that's great. Let them roll along. Don't waste your energy. Put your energy into converting the neutrals over to your side. So thank you, Tim, for that beautiful tool. Third tool is speak the language. Abby, the IA, has a really great quote here. So you guys know you can come up with the best idea, the best design, the best UX, the best experience, but it's really hard to actually ship it and get it out there when there's 10 other people with 10 other opinions of what is the best, what is the most beautiful. So agreement is one of the hardest parts of our job, especially when we have different language. When we use different language. So listen to the language of management. Again, I got this from Tim. What you see here, you don't see words like ethnographies, experiences, research insights, all the things that we groove on. They use a whole different language when they're speaking. So try to attune yourself to that so that you can start using that language too. A year ago in Rhode Island at UX Strategy, I took a workshop with the fabulous Leah Bewley, and she covered speaking the language of business. So a lot of what I'm sharing with you, I learned at that workshop. So the difference between business and UX, the lens in which they view the world is as such. The business lens views the world through operations lens and quantitative analysis and hard rational numbers, et cetera. These people often have MBAs, and so they have a whole different kind of schooling than us, because our lens is obviously through design and through human-computer interaction, cognitive psych, anthropology, all the kind of different backgrounds we bring to the fore. You can see that there's a bit of a disconnect. And so that translates into a language disconnect. Business language talks about net promoter score, key performance indicators, revenue, cost savings, you guys know. But what do we talk about all the time, especially when we're trying to get our ideas across or have influence? We're saying, oh, these users, we got great stories and insights from our research and design best practices. And while they're obviously good and important, the business people see an indirect impact to the business, and so they don't really see the correlation, like what's in it for me. So there's a disconnect between a high-level outward-facing business strategy and our kind of UX product strategy that we focus on, somewhat myopically maybe. You need to correlate long-term impact to design to the business. And so, as Leah says, when you create a design strategy, it needs to talk concretely about how it'll impact KPIs, numbers, and growth. So luckily, she gave us some little tools that I'm going to share with you. So what you do is you start off by using measures to spot a need. That means that quantitative analysis, business intelligence, use that as a starting point, because that immediately builds a correlation between what you're doing and what the business already trusts and has a lot of value stock in. And then come up with ways that you will measure the improvements. You spot a need, and then you think, I'm going to measure this. How am I going to measure it? So you plot that out, and then you measure along the way. So you measure along the way, and then you also measure the improvements at the end. So it's measure, measure, measure. So all of you who thought you didn't have to do math because you're designers, guess what? This is how you become more valuable. So hopefully these techniques that I've learned, standing on the shoulders of giants, will help you guys increase the value within your organization. So that's the 1 tenet and 3 tools that hopefully will be useful for you guys. So now I'm going to show you how I applied this into my own work. I'm going to share a case study with you. All right, so I was working in Australia at Different, doing really strategic stuff, service design, totally research-based, and loving it. And then my contract was up, and I came back home to Vancouver. Vancouver's nice looking, but it really wasn't cutting edge in the UX. In 2011, when I came back, there were no jobs in UX strategy at all. No one even, they were like, UX what? Strat what? No one had heard of service design. I really wanted to work in service design, and everyone's like, what? There's no one even heard of that. And so I came back, and I needed a job. I'm like, I can't work strategically. Well, I might as well work in UX, because that's better than not working in UX. So I took a 3-month contract at our BC Lotteries. And it was a 3-month contract to just design an interface. And they basically had the scope and vision all worked out. They wanted to bring me in as a decorator, right? Design us an interface. And I'm like, I can do that. I design interfaces, sure. But wait a minute. Who are our users? I sat down with the stakeholders, and I just asked these basic questions, and they couldn't answer any of these. They're really smart people, but they were just thinking, go, 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 make it digital, make it mobile, go, go, go. And I'm like, stop. What problems are we trying to solve here? Who are our users? So I sat down with the stakeholders, and I got them to articulate the strategy. And in that conversation, I educated them, and we saw a need to do some upfront user research. Yay, already I'm not so much of a decorator, more of an architect here. So I got to do some great research work and translate it into the models that you guys are all familiar with. And in addition to that, every time I would do research, I would start educating the colleagues within the organization. So lunch and learns, you guys are all familiar with. But I would also do something that I call subversive education. Is if I do research, I put it somewhere really visible, and it was great that they had these glass wall offices, So I put up all the data points from the research, and people would walk by and they'd be like, what is that? And I'd be saying, come on in, I'm going to show you what this is all about. And then I'd educate them and say, check this out. We met with users, and here's some of the insights. Got people in the organization excited about the research and excited about learning about our users. And then as we were distilling the research into models, involve the stakeholders wherever possible. You guys are familiar with the technique where evidence-based personas, you create a skeleton that is completely based on fact and evidence and research, but then you give the ownership over to the stakeholders and give them the fun part of giving them the name and the color of their hair and all that fun stuff, because then they feel like they created that thing. They're like, hey, that's Bob. I named Bob, and Bob drives a Pinto because I gave him a Pinto. And all that fluffy stuff that I don't think makes personas all that useful could be just the veneer underneath your very sound research-based personas. But hey, the stakeholders have ownership, and all of a sudden they get a lot more buy-in than if you just present them fully made. So all of this continually proved value. And when you're more valuable, you have more influence over projects. So remember, I didn't want to be decorator. I wanted to be architect. My ultimate goal in working there, remember, it was a 3-month contract, but by this time it was a 1.5 years later. My ultimate goal was to have my user research influence a project before the technology and the business got in a room and decided everything. So this is the details of the case study. So I don't know how it is in New Zealand. Does anyone here play bingo? Yeah. It's actually, I don't see a lot of really young people playing bingo. That's okay. So in British Columbia, the bingo halls, there's kind of 2 facets to bingo. You can see there's paper with the dabbing, dab, 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 dab. And then there's an electronic terminal that sort of increases your chances to win. It doesn't take a lot of mental effort or any effort at all in that electronic. So people are playing paper, and they're usually playing electronic at the same time. And so here's the kind of case study of how I help BC Lotteries see their users in a new light. So they wanted to make a new electronic bingo. And I was listening to the language of business. And of course, the business people are saying retain existing players, sustain land-based business, all this stuff that had nothing to do with the user experience. There was a lot of assumptions about players that I uncovered when I did that stakeholder interview. And that was, they thought if they removed the paper bingo, that would be okay, because lots of people also played that electronic, remember? And they thought that because they saw people dabbing, they thought the dabbing, now that's probably the fun part of bingo. So if we make an electronic dabbing thing, that would be it. That would be a fun and exciting bingo. And I said, whoa, hold on. What if we just do some research and understand these bingo players and what makes the game of bingo fun? Let's do that. And so I worked with a bunch of executives and a bunch of stakeholders, and it was basically just me. But hey, I got to be kind of more of an architect here, right? I was helping them shape the solution. And so I went out and did the research and got some wonderful stories. I met these people. These people, they would take a bus in from far out in the suburbs, and they would unpack suitcases of stuffed animals and lucky charms and talismans. And they would get all dressed up, and they'd make a day of it. And I just met so many wonderful people and heard wonderful stories. Like this woman would tape her favorite hockey players to her monitor, etc. Just getting to know these people. And here's what I learned, is that these people, who are mostly seniors, even though I did meet one young person and I had to take her photo because I was like, hello. These people enjoy mental stimulation, because bingo is actually really hard to play. I tried playing it with the paper, and I was like, oh my gosh, even the more cards you have, the more difficult it becomes. And so these seniors, they didn't go to, say, a casino and just mindlessly pull on the slot machines. No, they like bingo because it actually takes a lot of mental acuity. They enjoy the stimulation. And then what I learned is that even though the paper and the electronic were played always concurrently, the electronic was more just to increase your chances to win, but the paper bingo was the game. So the thing is that the business, they want quantitative numbers, and if they just looked at the picture quantitatively, the business would have taken away the paper because you've got more chances to win. So looking at just the numbers, it's like, well, we've got 72 times electronic than paper, so let's take away the paper. But what they didn't know is that the electronic had no skill, no mental effort. All of that was in the paper. And if they took away the paper part, they would have taken away the whole fun of the game. I remember people saying, if I said, what if it was just purely electronic? They'd say, that's so boring. I actually observed somebody reading a novel as they played the electronic bingo, because that's how much effort it takes. So luckily, I got to help them rethink this project. The scope and vision was actually influenced by this research. That was my ultimate goal. And so I heard these executives say, we better rethink this transition. Whereas before, they're like, let's yank it away because it makes business sense. We learned what is the fun and exciting element of paper bingo. Guess what? It wasn't dabbing. Can you believe how boring that would be, just sitting there mindlessly dabbing on an electronic screen? And also getting to know our seniors, that's most of the bingo players, is this is really physically taxing, right? You know that whole Minority Report interface? That's really hard on your arms. No one ever thinks of that in the movies. And more importantly, the results created empathy towards target users, because I hate to say it, but some team members are like, oh, they're all old farts anyway, and like using language like that. But once I brought these stories to life and told them about these fabulous people, they stopped speaking about them disparagingly, and there was a lot more empathy in the language. So I got to have influence over the scope and vision, and that was my goal. And so I used some of those tools and techniques that I taught you earlier. Also remember shifting towards improving the discipline. What I did with that is I created case studies and I gave talks on that experience and tried to raise up the UX discipline in Vancouver, and that actually worked out really well. So I hope you can apply these principles to your own work as well. And thank you so much for listening.